I'm Donna Berg from Hamilton, Montana. My husband is John Berg, and he was with Headquarters CCA, 12th Armored Division.
Okay, I want to start off by asking you about your mother and father and what your childhood was like.
All right. I was born and raised in Blue Springs, Nebraska. My dad was a conductor on the Burlington Railroad, and I had a wonderful child life.
What do you remember most about the Depression?
My brother was born in 1931, and my parents were getting low on money, and the townspeople, and my dad got laid off of the railroad because he had gone to the First World War, and the railroad didn't want him to, but he went anyway. So when he came back, he didn't get his seniority back. So the town council came to my mother and dad and asked them if they would come downtown and run a little restaurant, that the people were leaving town and they would like them to do that. And so they decided that they would do that. So we ate and had a place to sleep and all. And the CCC company came to town, and so Mother and Dad had to get a bigger restaurant, and they rented our home out to the head of the CCC company. And then we stayed in, they got a big Quonset hut and fixed it up for rooms and a living room, and we stayed there. So the Depression was not hard for us. At least we ate and had clothes to wear and so forth. We didn't come out rich.
What kind of educational experience do you have at school?
I graduated from high school, of course, and I had a scholarship to Chillicothe, Missouri, there was a business college there at the time. So I attended that for 6 months, and then I started working. And I worked as a secretary, as an executive secretary, as an administrative assistant, different places. We've moved many, many times in our marriage, and each time I would find a job and work and do that type of work. Mm-hmm.
So when did you meet your husband?
I met him when I was a sophomore in high school. He lived at Wymore, Nebraska, and I lived at Blue Springs, Nebraska, little towns a mile apart. And we met through the church. We both attended an evening league service. And a friend of ours, of both of us, was having a party, which we were invited to. And so we really got to know each other a little better. And he called then for a date, and of course at that time you had to ask your parents if you could go, and they said yes, and you please come home right after the show. Whatever. Pretty young, you know, when you're a sophomore in high school. I was 14. Mm-hmm.
Well, how did you feel when you found out that he was going to war?
At the time, I had scarlet fever, and I was in the business college at Chillicothe, Missouri at the time he left. And so he came down to see me and had to sit outside the window and visit with me. And we had become engaged, and my engagement ring was diamonds and rubies. And so he sent me a big bouquet of white carnations and red roses.
So when did you become engaged?
Oh dear.
Oh, you don't have to tell me the exact date. I just want to know.
Oh, all right. It would have been in 1943.
And what had he already gone to? Like, didn't he go to? Well, where was he ever stationed at Camp Barnsley?
Yes, yes.
Was he already in Camp Barnsley?
No, he was just leaving. At that time, he was just leaving home, and he was sent first to a pigeon company, a signal pigeon company in, seems to me it was in Louisiana. I'm not sure. And then from there, I think they applied to go to ASTP, and he was sent to Socorro, New Mexico. And so that's where he started at ASTP. And then, of course, the government decided that they needed more boys, and so they closed down anybody going to ASTP and sent them off to different outfits. And they sent him at that time to the 12th Armored, and by then they were at Camp Barkley.
Tell me about when y'all got married.
Oh my. My parents, having passes, took me on went with me on the train to Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas. They went that far with me. And then I got on a train that was full of soldiers, and there was another young lady on the train from Lincoln, Nebraska. She and I had to sit on our suitcases in the aisle. There was no room for us. So she was going to get married too. She was going as far as, I think, San Antonio. So we sat on our suitcases until we got to Muskogee, Oklahoma, and the soldiers were sitting 3 in a seat. 2 of them got off, and we got their seats, but we were exhausted, you know. So I arrived in Abilene at 4 o'clock in the morning, and John was there to meet me and took me to the hotel and had to get right back to camp. So I had to go get the marriage license. So I went to the courthouse, and after I rested and cleaned up and so forth, I went to the courthouse, and the lady said to me, "We'll take in your information first." So I told her that I was 19, and she wanted my birth date and all about me, you know, so she got all that, and that was fine. And she said, "Now tell me about the young man," and so I gave her his name and his birth date, and she closed the book. And she said, "That is not old enough in Texas to get married." I said, "Oh, but I didn't come all this way without affidavits. I have affidavits from his folks, and we have the letter from," you had to have a letter from, I suppose his commanding officer. I had that too. So she opened the book and wrote the marriage license. So when he tells people he paid $2 for me, I tell him, no way, I paid $2 for him. So then a friend loaned him his car, and he came in that evening, and we went back to Camp Barkley. We're not sure which chapel it was. I should have looked before we came, but in my mind it's chapel number 10, but I'm not sure that's right. And we were to be married at 8 o'clock. Well, the chaplain was late, 45 minutes late. And John hadn't told anyone he was getting married, because the last time someone did, they made the whole outfit dress up and go to the wedding. So he just went in the barracks, and a couple of guys were dressed up going to town, and he said, "Come on, you're coming to my wedding." So he got them to come to the wedding. And so we were duly married, and went to send telegrams home to our folks that we had been married, and the lady behind the counter said, "Congratulations," and first time it really dawned on you that you had actually done that. So, and then we had, let's see, we were married on Thursday evening. We had Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Monday morning he went on bivouac for 2 weeks. And by this time we had found a room with what we called an old maid. She was probably 35, you know, or some horrendous age like that. So, but we had a nice room there, and so he was off on bivouac. So they were having a civil service exam in town. So I went and took civil service exam, and when he came back, I was working at Camp Barkley.
What did you think about that?
Oh, he thought that was fine. Sure. I mean, it was something to do, and the money didn't hurt.
Well, now, you didn't tell me if he was AWOL when he came to pick you up.
I'm not going to tell you either. Yes, he indeed was. And but he had coverage, you know. Someone was going to say present. He got back in time to say present himself, and I believe the story goes that there were 2 presents for John Berg.
That's funny. Can you tell me a little bit about your activities when your husband was stationed at Camp Barkley? You said you got the job there. And were there other Army wives that did the same thing? And if so, tell me about your companionship with them.
I was placed in the motor pool, and all we had in there, of course, were drivers, and one secretary, and one lieutenant who had never had a secretary and didn't even know the meaning of the word. So it was a little tough, and I really had very little to do until it must have been only about 2 months later. In came a captain to take over the motor pool, and he came strolling in and looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Very little." I said, "But I am the secretary here, and will do what needs to be done." And he said, "Well, how can you stand it in this little bitty place with all the drivers and everything?" I said, "I have no choice, you know, this is where they put me." Well, he said, "We'll go find a better building." So he and I got in the car, and we drove around Camp Barkley until we found a larger building, a place for our offices. And he said, "I'll go get this for us." And he did. And we moved into it, and I spent the rest of the time at Camp Barkley until they closed it in that office. Had some wonderful experiences. The German prisoners worked there. They would bring me one of their rolls every morning. They were lovely. Mm-hmm.
What are some other experiences?
One morning, the captain and I had to go somewhere. So we had to drive. We were driving through the 12th Armored area. And here was a young man in a gas mask. It was a practice. And captain said to me, "Look, Donna, there's a man from Mars." I said, "Look, Captain, it's John Berg." And it was. Yeah, that's okay, was it? And so the other, I mean, like I say, there were a lot of little incidents. Once boxes of candy came into the commissary. And I had been there a long time, and there were a lot of soldiers worked in there, and I did their morning report, and they knew me very well. And they started bringing me boxes of candy. And I had a whole drawer full of boxes of candy. And the captain came in and he said, "What is going on?" And I said, "Well, they got candy at the commissary." And I said, the guys are bringing me candy." "Well," he said, "I'll go get you some more." He went and got me some more candy. So I really did have a whole drawer full of that. Then another little incident, they called a meeting of all the officers and all the soldiers. And they left me and I think 2 other civilians at the camp, at the motor pool with all the German prisoners. Nothing happened, but I thought that was... And in strolled the camp commander. And he looked at, and I was no part of that, you know, but he walked in and said, "And what are you doing?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, I'm here to take phone messages in case we get any calls on the meeting, and just in general looking after the office." Well, he said, "Very, very good." And he walked over to the meeting and told them that. And he told them that the gal at the motor pool was really on the ball. Hard up for something to say.
I think your husband, I believe, told me that you had said no twice to a general.
2 generals.
2 generals.
I told 2 generals no. But they were not with the 12th Armored Division, and they were not at Camp Barkley. So do you still want to hear about it? Okay. When I left Camp Barkley, I transferred to what was then Camp Carson, Colorado, at Colorado Springs, and they put me in the laundry office. I wanted to go to the hospital, but I got in the laundry office. So time went by, and I started working the counter. And the officers would bring their clothes in to be cleaned. The enlisted men had to send them in on a roster, but the officers could bring their clothes in to be cleaned, and they would. And I had 2 generals, and they first sent the drivers, and then the next time they came in, both of them. And so from that day on, every time they needed something clean, the generals would come in, and we'd visit a minute or 2, you know, and they were very nice men. And so one day, we got an order from the camp commander saying that no officers' clothing would be taken over the counter, that they must all come in on a roster. Well, that was the day that the 2 generals came. And the first one, he came in, I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but, there's a new camp order that we can't take your things to be cleaned over the counter anymore." "All right," he said, and out he went. Second, the same. And so it was only about 10 minutes, and my captain came out and said, "Donna, I think I'd like to speak to you." He said, I have an idea you did this. Did you tell 2 generals no?" And I said, "That was the order." "Now," he said, "you know that the camp commander is only a colonel." And he said to tell you that he admired your ability to follow orders, but would you please accept the general's clothes to be cleaned? I said, "Of course I will." So they came back with their clothes, but they sent the drivers in. Both of them sent the drivers in. So that afternoon, just before we closed, the door opened. I'll not tell you which outfit it was, but in came, I would say, 25 officers from that group came in the door. And they had a spokesman, and they stepped up the counter and said, "I'd like to speak to the young lady that tells 2 generals no." So I said, "That was me." And they said, "We only want to say to you that the next time you do it, would you please call us?" And out they went. And so it was the next week, the drivers came again, but the next week the generals had to come in, and they were grinning, it was a big joke. It was fun. I'm sorry.
Well, I would like to know how you corresponded with your husband and what that was like.
It was just letter writing. And there would be just weeks on end when you didn't hear from him, and the same he did not hear from me. But I wrote every night, and he wrote as often as he possibly could. And the other thing that happened at the laundry office, our captain was not a friendly person, and he asked me one day why no one liked him. And I told him that because he didn't pay attention to us. I said, "Sometimes you come in and you barely say good morning to us." And he said, "Oh, that's right, I am like that." And from that moment on, he found out where each of our husbands were, And he would stop at our desks and talk to us and tell us what that particular outfit was doing if he could, if he knew anything or if he could do that. And it made it a lot more pleasant, and it gave us a little news now and then. We also had German prisoners working there. And one of them asked me where my husband was, and I said, he's in Germany. And he grinned slyly, and it got right to me because I thought, oh, he knows something is terrible that's going to happen, but he didn't. and we were so good to the German prisoners that on the base at Camp Carson, they went on strike because they'd had fish twice in a week. And they allowed it. I mean, I guess they could, anyway, they got it straightened out and they went back to work, but that's something.
How did you prepare for your husband to come home? When you heard that he was going to be coming home, how did you prepare for that?
We had information that when they came home, they would be different. And to go slowly and accept it and try to work it out. And so I just decided that I could do that. You get a little independent when you're young and you've been on your own and been so ornery, doing ornery things all that time. And so I just told myself that I could do that. And when he first hit the East Coast, I was at a wrestling match with friends and didn't get his call. So the next day I got his call that he was home. I didn't know when he was coming, of course. And he would be coming into his hometown, and I should meet him there, which was Sutherland, Nebraska. His parents lived there at that time. So I quit my job and went back to Sutherland to wait for him. And he was coming in by train, and he wasn't supposed to be there until the next day. But when the train came into town, being a railroader's daughter, I heard the whistle that said that it had stopped and started. And I just knew he was coming. And sure enough, he was running. He was running to the door. And his mother got there first. And so he gave her a big hug and set her aside. Then I was there. And his brothers and sisters, his two brothers and their wives were there. So we had quite a nice reunion. Mm-hmm.
Did you have children at this time?
No, our children were born later. Mm-hmm.
So when you came home, did you go back to work? Or
I've always worked, yes. Mm-hmm. I've always worked.
did he leave all his work?
He didn't mind, no. I needed to because he wasn't well, and I needed to work because they had said he could die within the next 10 years, and so I needed to keep able to work. So that's why I just kept working.
Would you like to find out about that? How that made you feel about having him come home and spend time with you? What those circumstances were?
Well, it made us both feel bad, but I don't know. We just worked through it, and he's wonderful, and so we just got by that and went on with our lives, and there really was, nothing big to say about it. We just worked through it. You don't know anything, you're just kids yet, really, and he's different. He's a little different. He a little quick on the trigger, and so you just work with it. I think I've probably said enough, don't you?
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.